Trust is an essential ingredient of every healthy relationship. If it's with your friends, your family, your kids, your colleagues, but especially with your partner. But how can you create a strong sense of trust in a relationship from the very beginning, especially if you've been hurt in the past? And how can you repair trust once it's been damaged? That's what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I'm your host. I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. My background, I'm the founder of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching. I'm a licensed psychologist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a board certified coach, and I specialize in growth, love, happiness, and success in my practice. And that's also what this podcast is all about. So if you're a growth-oriented person who wants stronger relationships or to feel happier and just an increased sense of well-being with yourself and the world. And also, if you aspire to create success for yourself by your own definition, you are totally in the right place. And I'm so happy you're here. And especially today, because today we're talking about trust in relationships, which is so important because it's really everything. It's the foundation. If we don't have trust in our relationships, nothing else works. Trust is what allows us to feel safe getting close to people. And in a very real way, trust is the fabric of a relationship. It's this basic building block of connection. We need to have the safety of trust in order to have any kind of meaningful bond with another human, but especially with our partners, right? That is what enables us to be vulnerable with people or to show up fully, to let our significant other see the real us, flaws and all, and also to feel just fundamentally safe in a relationship. Without trust, we can't have intimacy. And without intimacy, relationships don't have anything. They feel empty. They feel unsatisfying, right? So today we're going to be talking about what trust really is in a multidimensional kind of way that's over and above like what we think of as the basics, being honest, not lying or deceiving, right? Trust actually goes much deeper than that. And by understanding what trust is really like made of, then you understand different aspects of trust to focus on to help you build trust in your relationships. And then too, we're going to be talking about what damages trust. That might include some things that surprise you. Believe it or not, it's very easy to damage trust in relationships without even realizing you're doing it, but still have it really impact the quality of your relationship. So it's important to talk about. And then with those pieces, we're going to be talking about things that you can do to build trust in relationships. And we'll be putting it all together. And at the end, I'm going to be giving you some action steps and things to think about and do so that you can grow in this area. And before we dive in, it is very important to me to be a trustworthy and reliable partner for you in this podcast and on your journey of growth. And so, what I'd like to share is that, as you'll understand when we dive into this topic, trust goes really deep. And there are aspects of trust that really tie into who we are as people, how we show up in the world, the things that we learned in our family of origin about how to be. And certainly if trust has been damaged in the past and you have had like a betrayal trauma, or if you struggle to feel safe in relationships, even with trustworthy people because you've been hurt in the past. And certainly if you're dealing with the aftermath of a real breach of trust, like infidelity or financial infidelity, or you're with somebody where trust has really been harmed by previous actions. This is a long journey. There's a lot of value in doing things like this, listening to podcasts to understand what trust is, how it works, how to improve it. And I hope you'll definitely get actionable things out of our conversation today. And because these things go so deep and they're attached to aspects of ourself that can actually be difficult to gain awareness of, much less know what to do differently in going forward, it is fundamentally important to find a trustworthy partner to do this work with, somebody who you can count on to be your guide in this process, like a really good therapist, if your own personal growth work is at play here, or a really good couples counselor if this is something that you and your partner need to work on together. And what I have learned through the years is that therapists will mean well and will be very effective with helping people with certain kinds of problems. And when it comes to these kinds of relational issues, it can be really challenging to find the right kind of therapist who can really help you in a meaningful way, who can keep their promises to you about having the growth experience be a trustworthy one that you can count on. And so, when you are looking for the right therapist to work with around trust specifically, it's really important, if you're going to do this with your partner, to find a marriage and family therapist who specializes in systemic relationships, attachment, and who practices evidence-based forms of couples counseling, like emotionally focused couples therapy or the Gottman method. These are research-backed, evidence-based forms of relationship counseling that have been shown to help people work through the kinds of issues that we're talking about today successfully. If you're looking to partner with an individual therapist, it's similarly important that you work with somebody who has a lot of experience around attachment psychology and also who really understands relational dynamics. I say this because most therapists are trained to diagnose and treat clinical mental health conditions. And while that is really good, we need that in the world, that is a different skill set and area of expertise and the kind of relational and growth work that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm just saying this because, again, to really do meaningful growth work in this area, you're going to want to have a partner who can work with you consistently for a few months, potentially a few years, depending on what's going on. And it's important that you find a trustworthy partner to do that with. So we'll be talking more about the specifics, but I've also included some resources for how to find the right person, the kinds of questions to ask, and how to know if a therapist that you're evaluating is going to be trustworthy for you or not, because that matters. So I'm offering that right at the beginning in the spirit of being a trustworthy partner to you. Also, just to manage your expectations. When it comes to trust, it is not something that we can just turn on or off. You cannot will yourself to trust somebody. You cannot decide to trust somebody again if trust has been broken. Trust is developed or healed through an active, intentional, and also very experiential process that occurs over time through small but strategic, trustworthy behaviors. It's through having these experiences over and over again, either in the beginning of a relationship or if trust has been damaged further in, you need corrective emotional experiences, and not just one. You need a lot of them. They build on themselves over time. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how that works in order to manage your expectations about what's ahead here, like how this actually goes down, but also just say out loud, the things that we're going to be talking about today are connected to very big, deep things. And it's really normal to have a lot of big feelings come up related to these aspects of trust. We're going to be digging into old family stuff, your relationship with yourself, particularly if there's been a betrayal. You can expect to feel a lot of anger or anxiety. And one of the primary components of restoring trust is emotional emotional safety, as well as self-awareness. And it can be really difficult to do these things on your own. So if you do this work and find yourself bumping into some of these hard places and it feels difficult to move forward, that's a really good indication that it's going to be important for you to do this with a growth partner, like a good therapist. So, with that in mind, let me share more about what I'm talking about because as I do, you will understand. So, the first thing that we're going to dive into is understanding the components of trust and really unpacking it because I think we often think of trust as being this monolithic thing. You either have it or you don't. And that trust depends on very specific things like, can I count on you to not lie to me or hurt me or betray me, right? But it really goes so much deeper. And I think it's this trust of, if I depend on you, if I rely on you, you're not going to let me down. But it even goes deeper than that. It's more than just a promise not to disappoint or hurt somebody. I think of true trustworthiness as this commitment to acting with love and operating in a way that's really for the highest and best of the people that we care about. So, going into the components of trust, it's important to understand that trust is not a one-dimensional thing. It is really multifaceted, like a diamond. And a really important thing to know is that trust is defined in different ways by different people. Trustworthy behaviors mean different things. They look like different things depending on your map of the world and your frame of reference. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that. But what is important to know is that trust also very much goes back to some basic building blocks. And if you don't have these things, it's going to be very difficult to have any kind of trust in a relationship. One of the most important components of trust is integrity. And when I say integrity, I am talking about having clearly defined values and then living in a way that is consistent with those values. You're clear about who you want to be in the world, and you intentionally show up in ways that are consistent with that code of ethics, really, that way of being. And so this can look differently depending on what those values are. But for some people, the values may be, I keep my word. If I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. You can count on me. It can also mean having a way of operating that is consistently trustworthy, that ties into some of these other aspects of trust, including reliability, honesty, and most importantly, love. Because trust is not always about making you feel good, like love. Love is not always soft and mushy and, positive feelings. Real love is about acting in the best interests of another person that you care about and having courageous conversations or even difficult conversations in service of that love. And so that's the kind of love that I'm talking about when it comes to trust. Trust could mean having the emotional courage to confront uncomfortable truths in an emotionally safe way. And at its core, trust implies safety. When someone trusts you, they believe that they're safe from deceit, like lying or cheating or stealing. But trustworthiness isn't just about that. It's really foundational to character. And that goes back to this idea of integrity and getting clear about what that means to you. So, for example, people can oftentimes think of themselves as very trustworthy, fundamentally trustworthy people, but not realizing that the way that we do small things as it relates to integrity informs the entire experience of trustworthiness that other people have with us. So you could say, I am a person of integrity, and still be in the line of the carnival, and when the person asks you how old your kid is, you tell them 4 instead of 5 because it's a $10 price difference in the ticket, right? I mean, these small little things. And that ties back into this code of ethics, these values around I tell the truth no matter what, even if it ties into outcomes that I would rather not have. It's more important to me to be an honest person in every area of life because it goes back to my code of ethics, and that shows up in different ways for different people. So to think about what those values are and what they really mean to you is an important part of getting clear around trustworthiness. For some people, integrity and trustworthiness is tied to that reliability. If I tell you I'm going to be there on time, I'm going to be there on time. I remember important things. If I commit to you to doing something, I'm not going to break plans with you. I'm not going to change my mind, right? It could go into that consistency. But for other people, integrity is related to different things like emotional safety, like having courageous conversations and being honest, not just like not concealing things, but being honest around I'm having a reaction to something that's happening in this relationship, and I care enough about you to broach this conversation with you. Or I'm really worried about something that I see happening, and I'd like to talk about this because honesty is more than about just not lying. Honesty goes back to authenticity and vulnerability. And when these small things aren't happening, when we're not operating with love for others, with love for ourselves, when we're not really being honest, when we are maybe pretending like we feel one way when we actually feel another. We're concealing things from other people. We're depriving them of the opportunity to have all the information that they need. These things damage trust in very real and impactful ways. And so, one thing I'd like you to think about is what components of trust are most important to you personally? What is your trust language, for lack of a better term? Because getting clear about that and what trust means to you can help you, one, think about where you may need to grow in your ability to be a trustworthy person for other people, but also understanding if it feels like your trust has been broken by others, why that is, particularly in the context of trust that's been broken in relationships. In some of these small ways that we're describing, it's like, death by 1,000 cuts. If somebody lies to you or steals from you or cheats on you, like that's a big explosion, right? Trust is just obliterated. But we can damage trust and confidence in other people through the little ways that I've been describing. And it has a really big impact. And in my experience as a marriage counselor, many times when relationships are in trouble, it's because trust has been damaged in some of these fundamental and foundational ways, often without people having even realized that trust has been damaged to the extent that it has. Going back to things like, you said you would unload the dishwasher, or I trusted you to watch the kids, and why is this thing happening? Now you're yelling at them, right? It erodes my confidence in you to be the kind of partner I want and need you to be. So far above and beyond actual lying or deceit. This goes beyond betrayal. I mean, that's like the obvious one, right? But people can experience betrayal from things that others don't even realize are being perceived as a betrayal. Sometimes it could be the feeling that you're not really a safe person. If I tell you something in confidence, you might tell somebody else in a way that feels kind of yucky to me. Or that perhaps underneath the exterior, right, you might be thinking about me or like having judgments or private criticisms of me that I can kind of sense, but that you're not really saying out loud. That damages trust. that you may say one thing to my face, but then talk about me behind my back. That can impact trust in a really major way. But also going back to these disappointments, because trust is really delicate, and letting people down or not living up to the promises either explicitly made or implicitly made, even promises that have been assumed, that are defined by what I understand to be how people should behave, right? Um, this can all chip away at trust, and it can be compromised by all kinds of different things. I mean, something like ADHD, if that's not well managed, and if somebody is forgetful or not following through with things, or is disorganized to the point where it's difficult for them to get places on time or keep their commitments, that can really damage trust, especially if they're not taking responsibility for it. Trust can also be impacted by different cultural codes, different family of origin based ways of being that impact our understanding of how people should be. If you're partnered with somebody who comes from a very different culture and has different expectations of like how people should live, and you're not operating in a way that's in alignment with those expectations, and it's not something that's being discussed openly, that'll really damage trust and create a lot of anger and resentment in the process. And even more subtle deceptions, people pleasing, maybe even agreeing to things in order to kind of smooth things over or make other people happy, but that are not really in alignment with how you really feel about a situation or what you really need. That is a kind of deception that can be really damaging to relationships, even if in the moment you're thinking, well, I don't want to create the ruckus or rock the boat. If you are agreeing to things that is out of alignment with your authentic self, especially if it's showing up later in kind of passive aggressive ways, it damages people's trust in you to be honest with them. If you're avoiding conflict consistently, that will also damage people's trust in you, because they don't trust you to, stay in the ring with them and care about them enough to have courageous conversations that really resolve conflict in meaningful and lasting ways. And even small things like, habitually overcommitting to stuff where you're genuinely rushed and too busy and like can't juggle it all, that can be a breach of trust, not intentionally done. But if you're letting people down over and over again, I mean, if you're always apologizing for things, people care about you and they love you, and they can see maybe it's not intentional, but it chips away. It chips away. And certainly honesty is the most profound trust breaker. But again, it's not about blatant lying. There is a spectrum, from saying yes when you really mean no, or even hiding certain aspects of yourself, or misrepresenting your true nature. Right? If there's a constant tug of war between who you want to be perceived as being versus who you actually are, that, when it's discovered, can create trust issues in relationships if people don't really know you and then are surprised later to find out who you really are. And again, there's real damage to trust that comes through simple emotional unsafety. And this can manifest as lashing out at people in anger, or being really reactive, or being unwilling to address conflict in appropriate ways, or even using others to satisfy your own emotional needs without considering their well-being. If you're dealing with stuff and can't don't know how to soothe yourself. You haven't yet invested in those emotional intelligence skills. You're dumping on friends without really being respectful or understanding how they're feeling in the moment. If you are dealing with a lot of anxiety and often looking to others for validation or for others to like help you feel a certain way about yourself, that will damage people's trust in you because it's not emotionally safe for them to depend on you for their own legitimate emotional needs. And so to be considering like emotional safety as a really important component of trust. I see it often as a marriage counselor. Maybe one person comes in and says, my partner isn't telling me the truth, or they've been concealing things from me, like how much they're spending, or other usually typically small things, but they are really angry about what they perceive as being breaches of trust. And there have been things that have been concealed. But on the other side, when you talk to the other person, they describe a real lack of emotional safety in the relationship. They perceive their partner as being aggressively critical or judgmental or harsh, which leads other people around them to feel like they have to hide and conceal for their emotional well-being. So when we think about the different dimensions of trust, it's important to consider them as a whole and think about how they relate to each other and how trust can be damaged in both large ways, but also small ways, in ways that we don't intend and oftentimes have no awareness of that damage even happening in the moment. And it's by gaining awareness around these things that we can ultimately grow. So also, going back to how trust can be broken through differences in values and expectations, going back to family of origin experiences or other things. I mean, just to share a couple personal examples, as I've talked about in podcasts in the past, I have ADHD, as did my mother, as does my child. It's just part of our inheritance, let's say. And, I'm at a place in my life now where I've been able to understand it and manage it, I think, in more effective ways. However, before I did that personal growth work, I was operating in ways that felt hurtful and untrustworthy even to people that I cared about, including my husband. He would ask me to do something and I would forget, or I would say that I would do something and then be overwhelmed by 150 million things that I wouldn't, or being late. I mean, it can show up in all kinds of different ways, but that damaged trust in our relationship. And it required a lot of emotional safety in order to talk about that openly and be able to correct it. But the difference was that my just MO, my way of operating, was different than his trust language and his expectations around what trust looks like. And so we've had other things to work on related to trustworthiness in these kinds of domains, as does everybody in relationships, because we all come from different places. And so it's by getting clear about all of these things, what it means to us, what it means to other people, that we can then have a frame of reference to do the work of growth and healing that building trust actually requires. And so to begin the process of building trust, either in a new relationship or an existing one, we first need to be thinking really deliberately about what it means to be trustworthy, because trust is precious. It's delicate, right? And we need to make thoughtful and discerning decisions about who we trust. And so, for example, in making this podcast, I often look to your questions to decide, what am I going to talk about on the podcast? Because I always want to be talking about things that are important to you. And from time to time, I have people reach out, and this happened recently on social media, and I think through my website, the comments at growingself.com. People will say things like, I'm with this person, and here is the list of all the terrible things they've done to me. How can I trust them again? And so one of my first responses to that is, should you trust them? again, because they may not be a trustworthy person. We build and cultivate trust through our experiences of being able to count on people, having them be people of integrity, people we can rely on, people who are acting with love for us, and people who are emotionally safe. And so, before we talk about how to build trust in a relationship, it's really important to consider, is that a good idea? Has the person that I'm with taught me that they are a fundamentally trustworthy person in the ways that are really important and meaningful to me, or not? And if your emotional guidance system is telling you that you shouldn't trust somebody for a lot of good reasons, I would actually encourage you to listen to that and act accordingly, rather than feeling like you should trust everybody, because you shouldn't. I will also say that it takes a long time to get to know people. You shouldn't have 100% trust in people that you don't know yet. It requires time to understand, what is this person's values? Are they a person of integrity? Are they emotionally safe? Do they operate with love? What can I expect from them? That is how trust is developed in relationships. And so, to take your time and or have conversations with someone around, if you're seeing things that are a disconnect between what you know you need in order to experience trust in a relationship and what they are showing you. This can actually be a really cool growth opportunity in relationships, but not always. And so, again, before we talk about building trust, I just do want to say out loud that it's really important to use discernment. And this can be a wonderful thing to work through with a great individual therapist, because if you have a history of trusting people that you shouldn't actually trust, that is something to unpack and work through to get to the bottom of. And furthermore, if you have been hurt or betrayed time and time again, particularly in your early relationships with caregivers or other people that were important to you, it may be very difficult for you to experience trust even with trustworthy people. So again, going back to the beginning, this is where it gets really old and deep, and where it's important to have a trustworthy partner in growth to be able to gain the kind of self-awareness and do the internal work that allows you to create fundamentally trustworthy relationships, either by being a trustworthy person yourself, or identifying, who is trustworthy versus not, or by learning how to feel safe with trustworthy people if you've had a lot of bad experiences in the past. So that is my caveat. But now, going into the building blocks of trust and like what it takes to have trust with another person, it goes back to a few things. It stems from integrity, reliability, courageous honesty stemming from a deep sense of love, and also ownership, meaning personal responsibility, and emotional safety. All of these components are really critical to have when it comes to building or mending trust in relationships. And it's so important to do this work because trust is enormously protective. When you have a lot of trust in a relationship, it's a buffer for conflict, even. When you think about the kind of trust that comes in a relationship, when you have had conflict with your partner, and even though, it gets heated in the moment, you can trust that they're going to stay in the ring with you, and that we can find a way to have a productive conversation where I listen to you and seek to understand you, where I'm responsive to you, like I hear what you say and let me try to do this differently next time, right? When you have a pattern of rupture and repair in relationships, and by rupture, I'm not talking about like catastrophic ruptures, but conflict, people get upset with each other. And when you can mend that over and over again, that turns into a really special kind of trust in a relationship. It's, I trust you to be able to, talk about hard things together, solve problems together, negotiate differences together, that you're not going to freak out and reject me or abandon me or have it turn into this really destructive, toxic feeling conflict. That's a huge kind of trust that comes from just being able to resolve conflict effectively together. And that ties in to multiple pieces of this, from integrity. I'm the kind of person that seeks to understand other people. I'm the kind of person that prioritizes relationships and that really works hard to find constructive solutions to differences. It goes into that, but also the piece around reliability. So, what reliability means is that you behave in ways that people expect you to consistently. Now, this can certainly have many positive connotations. It can mean you can count on me to do what I say I'm going to do, to show up places on time, XYZ. But reliability can also mean you can trust me to be a reliable friend to you, meaning that when we have something important to talk about, you can count on me to broach that conversation with you, even if it's going to be a difficult conversation, because I'm the kind of person who values love. I care about you. I care about this relationship. And because of that, I'm going to show up in ways that are even hard. That goes into that courageous honesty, right? And being able to have open conversations about difficult things that builds trust. It also ties into self-awareness, and being able to take ownership for your own stuff. But first of all, in order to do that, you have to know what your own stuff is. And that in itself can be an important component of building trust in relationships, is by doing your own work. I'll share a story about family dynamic where that didn't happen, just to paint a picture of what it could look like. In my family of origin, trust was broken over and over and over again because of differences in the kinds of things that we're talking about right now. There was nothing really catastrophic that happened related to trust until the end, but that's a story for another time. However, from the very beginning, trust was broken because my parents had very different values about what trustworthy behavior was. So, for example, I'm a first-generation American, Belgian American. My dad is Belgian. He was born there. Came here with his parents when he was younger. And my mom was a close to first generation Irish American who came from a very different family culture that prioritized different things and had different language related to trust. So on my dad's side, these Belgian values of hard work ethic, planning things like making advanced plans and then keeping those plans and showing up on time was very important to him. Also, keeping things in order, like the way that things were maintained, was very important to him. When that didn't happen, it felt like a breach of trust, right? Following through with what you said you were going to do. That was my dad's trust language, juxtaposed with my mom's trust language, which was very much centered around these different kinds of things: courageous honesty and being authentic, being open, and talking about things that bothered you. That was not part of my dad's trust culture. In fact, conflict avoidance was very much part of his preferred way of being. And similarly, with my mom, she really valued having a good time and enjoying life, which might mean spending money on things sometimes in order to have a good time, contrasted with my dad's values around being very conservative and frugal. when it comes to money. So a lot of trust damage happened with regards to those differences. And then furthermore, one of my mom's big trust languages was emotional safety. Like, no matter what, you can count on me to be kind to you, to be understanding, to have your back when the chips are down, right? Like, I respect how you feel, even if I disagree with you, because I love you no matter what. Whereas, my dad, was and is, if he was upset with something, it would sort of translate into judgment about people, criticism about people, right? And so these are examples of those small trust breaches that we talked about. None of it was of huge like bomb going off, but it led to this untrustworthy relational experience that both of them were having because their expectations about what was important, how people showed love, what it meant to be a fundamentally trustworthy person was different. And so they did not have the opportunity to develop growth and competencies in the areas that we're talking about today. If they had, they would have done some of these trust building things that I'm talking about with you right now, like having integrity, being really clear about what their personal values were and being very overt with how they were showing those values and being able to talk about those in really open and honest ways and take ownership over how they were displaying trustworthy or not trustworthy behaviors to each other just by virtue of their own map of the world. So to have conversations around, when we create a budget together, to me, that's a commitment. That's something that I'm counting on for you to uphold and to follow through with. So when you wind up spending X amount of money on the kids because it's a good time and everybody was having fun, that damages my trust in you in ways that feel really bad for me. I would really like that to be different and start building that bridge to the center. On the other side, when my mom might have said, when I am operating in a way that isn't, in alignment with your preferences, when you are critical or harsh with me, it damages my trust in you and, my sense of feeling loved or cared for or respected by you. I understand that you might have problems, and I hope that we can have conversations about them that help both of us get our needs met in this situation. But when you lash out at me or when you, roll your eyes and don't talk to me about something that's bothering you, like I can feel that and that damages my trust in our relationship. So these are the small ways that we build trust with our partners, and it comes from being clear about what our values are, being reliable, but also understanding what the values of our partners are when it comes to what their experience is being trustworthy and the things that we're doing that may damage their experience of us as being trustworthy. But all of these kinds of conversations require a high degree of emotional safety because you can't go into these places without the ability to be vulnerable and have like full disclosure, right? So that your partner, particularly early in a relationship, understands all of the facets of you. Like if you are hiding things about yourself going into it, or if you're trying to seem like you're the kind of person that is more like who and what you want your partner to be, as the years evolve and they begin to see that, oh, you have ADHD, you do things impulsively, and you're often late, and it's hard for you to stick to a budget, it will damage their trust in you compared to being able to have conversations around, these are some of the things that are true about me, and I understand that this could, damage your trust in me. So here's what I'm going to try to do in order to be a trustworthy partner for you. But here are the things that I need to feel trusting from you in return, and I hope that we can find a middle ground here. So, whether or not it's stuff that you are working on or that are related to your family culture, your value system, your way of being, or even if it's old emotional stuff that makes you reactive in certain situations, trust is built when you're upfront about these things. Trust is damaged when like they're hidden and then people are surprised by them later. So that's a really important component here. And this ties into the concept of taking ownership for yourself and really coming into every relationship, including your relationship with yourself, with a high degree of personal responsibility. It is impossible to have trustworthy relationships with other people if we're not able to take responsibility of the fact that how any of us behave does impact other people, particularly if it's bumping up against their trust language. And so, especially for those who've faced serious betrayals of trust, like affairs, or concealment, fraud, right? Rebuilding trust isn't just about stopping the hurtful actions like, well, I'm not seeing my affair partner anymore, so you can trust me again. It's really about this long term commitment to taking responsibility for showing up as a trustworthy person who is willing to do the work of repairing trust over a long period of time. It goes into the kind of trustworthiness that comes from being able to say, here's what was going on with me when I did those things. These were the stories that I was telling myself that justified those behaviors. Here is how I have grown and changed since then, or here's what I'm doing to grow and change since then. And here's what I'm committed to doing. Here's what you can expect from me going forward as I work to show you that I am a trustworthy person that you can count on. So it's communicating your values, being very honest, and then being very committed to following through in trustworthy ways and working on things. If you're hearing this and thinking about how appropriately so you may be showing up in your relationships and thinking about how trustworthy have I been in the ways that Lisa's talking about right now? I think that this is an opportunity for a lot of really productive reflection. How trustworthy am I? Can I trust myself? Do I keep commitments to myself? If I say I'm going to do something, do I do it? Can I trust myself not to react in a really emotionally big and possibly damaging way if I'm feeling triggered by something? And if through this reflection you come to understand that you've been engaging in behavior that breaks the trust of others, it's important to consider first starting to mend the relationship that you have with yourself. Thinking about what trust means to you. How do you talk to yourself? How do you manage your own emotions? Are you an emotionally safe person for yourself? But also being able to get clarity around what's going on in your mind that relates to the things that you do. So, for example, especially if you've behaved in untrustworthy ways in the past or ways that people you care about are experiencing as being untrustworthy, it's important to get really curious about your own thoughts. I mean, don't believe everything you think is something to like take on board because everything that people do that can be perceived in untrustworthy ways by others, whether it's lying or cheating or stealing or just showing up late or spending too much money or being reactive, right? If there's a narrative going on inside of your mind that is making excuses for why you do the things that you do, or certainly if it is displacing blame, well, I only did this because you it's really important to stop that and recommit to your own personal integrity around who do I want to be? What are the values that I am committed to upholding in small ways and in large ways? And how do I show other people those values in my relationships? So, doing that personal growth work and taking responsibility for yourself is a core component of having trustworthy relationships. And this is one of the things that can be really hard to do on your own because, you, like me, like everybody, we have blind spots. We don't even know what we're thinking about when we're doing these things half the time, but it's by unpacking this stuff with a good therapist that's able to ask you really thought-provoking questions and help you understand how the way you are behaving may not actually be in alignment with your values, can help you get clarity and recommit to not just how you want to show up in the world, but actually how to do that by the way you're managing what you're thinking, by the way you're regulating your emotions, and certainly by the way that you're behaving. So this is really deep and important work, and really good idea to get connected to a good therapist to do this work. But another primarily fundamentally important part of building trust in every relationship comes down to emotional safety. If you need to rebuild the trust in the relationship you are having with yourself, emotional safety is really important. This is especially true if you've been hurt or betrayed by other people in the past. In my experience, many times the biggest betrayal that people have to heal from is not what other people did to them. It's this awareness that somewhere along the way, they betrayed themselves because they maintained a situation or got into a situation where they got hurt over and over and over again, and they did not take action to protect themselves from an untrustworthy person. So thinking about how you act with love, not just for others, but for yourself, is a big component of both emotional safety and with trust. So when you have emotional safety in a relationship, it supports trust because it supports honesty. We're able to have courageous conversations with other people when we can trust them to not freak out or fall apart when we're talking about authentic and real things that need to be talked about related to who we are, or coming clean about things that we've done, right? And it also facilitates growth because we are all developing constantly. We are all on some spectrum of growth related to different domains of life. And in order to grow, we need to be able to confront with authenticity and honesty, like, where am I now? What are the mistakes that I've made? What are the things that I've learned? What do I need to understand about your experience in order to help me develop a different perspective or learn how to be a more trustworthy partner from you or for you? Like, we can't have those kinds of conversations and those kinds of growth moments unless there's emotional safety. And it's vital to have that because it's only through growth and experimentation and, quite frankly, failure that we develop the ability to become trustworthy people. I mean, like when I was developing competence around remembering things or getting places on time, like that required me building a lot of different systems and ways of thinking and ways of being and ways of operating that took time to get to, right? And to have somebody who was patient with me as I worked through this. And I think as my husband saw me do these things, his trust in me grew because he saw me working at it and taking responsibility for it. But it was also developing emotional safety in the relationship where I was able to say, I messed up, or this is better than it would have been, right? It allowed us, I think, each to understand our differences, understand our expectations, and reframing these differences as not being something that were intended to be hurtful towards each other. I mean, even though sometimes I would still forget things or not unload the dishwasher when I said I would or whatever. It stopped being damaging to my husband's trust because it meant something different. It wasn't, I can't trust her to keep her word. She doesn't care enough about me to do XYZ. It was, she didn't do these things because she really struggles to do these kinds of things sometimes. And so even though the behavior didn't always change, the level of hurt that was experienced by it was different. And that in itself was healing. And so emotional safety helps build understanding on each side that restores trust through understanding and through compassion and acceptance, sometimes rather necessarily than change. So that's a very important building block for all of this. So, when it comes to action steps, I have a few more things for you to think about and for you to experiment with doing, either on your own or ideally in conjunction with the support of a really good therapist who is competent and trustworthy to help you in this quest. But first of all, it's spending some time unpacking the things that we've been talking about today. What does trust look like to me? What are the things that are attached to trust from my values, my expectations, my culturally defined family of origin experiences? And what does trust mean to others? With acceptance of the fact that being trustworthy can look really different for different people. And then understanding those differences is what will help you build a bridge to the center. Certainly, though, unpacking how trustworthy am I from my partner's perspective or from other people's perspective, right? Or sometimes, how trustworthy am I for myself? But it boils down to this trustworthy checklist almost. Like, am I taking responsibility for myself? Am I holding myself accountable for operating with integrity in different situations? Am I being responsive to what other people are saying that they need from me, particularly when it comes to restoring trust in relationships? Am I respecting that? Am I following through? Am I showing up in an authentic way that creates emotional safety with other people that is defined by love? And again, emotional safety and authenticity is oftentimes, being brave enough to have courageous conversations about important things rather than avoiding conflict, which can be a very untrustworthy kind of behavior, right? And then certainly making emotional safety a huge priority. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who consider themselves to be very trustworthy because they show up places on time, they do what they say they're going to do, and they are highly critical. They lash out at people. They express a lot of toxic anger and feel entitled to do so because other people are not living up to whatever their code of standards is, right? Not realizing how damaging to trust and positive relationships these kinds of behaviors are. So just to put that in the old hopper. And then when it comes to that kind of exploration, we're all going to find these opportunities for growth when it comes to developing genuinely trusting and trustworthy relationships. And so when it comes to getting involved in this kind of growth work, you're going to want to find a really good therapist or coach who can do this with you. Again, because the roots of trust go back so deep, and there are blind spots related to trust, particularly when it comes to our own trustworthiness or when it comes to our expectations of trustworthiness in others. You can do this kind of growth work individually with your own therapist. Again, like, why do I keep having relationships with untrustworthy people? I can't trust myself to follow through with things for all of these reasons. How could I possibly be a reliable partner for somebody else? That's a great opportunity for growth. And that's something that can be very great work can come out of working with a coach for that kind of growth work. I will also add that particularly in the context of a major betrayal, like an affair or financial infidelity. It's vital that you're working with a really competent couples counselor, because you can expect that really big emotions are going to be present and will get in the way of the emotional safety that's necessary to be able to heal and grow together. Working with a really good licensed marriage and family therapist who practices evidence-based forms of couples and family therapy will help you both begin the process of understanding each other, coming clean, taking responsibility for the things that you've done, and learning how to reliably show up with integrity in ways that restore trust from this point forward in response to what your partner is really needing from you. And so also to remember that developing trust is a growth process that requires a growth mindset, which is this idea that we're all learning and growing and developing over time through practice and through continued learning, and that there's like a trajectory here, and that we grow in our ability to trust, we grow in our ability to be trustworthy, and that by taking ownership of the things that you're doing that may be obstacles to trustworthiness in your relationship can be a really important and powerful part of this growth process. Like, so for example, I've worked with so many couples where one person comes in with a lot of righteousness, says they are lying to me about how much money they're spending, or about where they're going with their friends, or about XYZ, or, whatever, in a way that is really damaging their trust. They're angry, they're hurt, they're upset, and legitimately so, because their code of trust is being violated, right? And then the person on the other side of that equation, through the emotional safety that the therapy room creates, can say things like, I feel like I can't talk to you about the things that are important to me. I feel like I need to live my life according to your standards. Like, you've made this budget about how much money we should be spending without being open to me putting input into this conversation. I feel like you don't respect my values and the things that are important to me. And that's why I feel like I can't tell you about things, or like I have to hide things from you sometimes. And so again, it doesn't change the fact that maybe there has been a dishonesty or concealing, but it changes the conversation, because there's a really important growth experience for the person on the other side to consider how they are living with integrity, showing up with love, or being a trustworthy person that supports honesty, authenticity, vulnerability in their partner to co-create the kind of relationship that they want to have. Like, these things are really multidimensional, and being able to take responsibility for how you're showing up in your relationships is fundamentally important, because when you get clear about what those things are that either damage trust or build it from your partner's point of view and for your own, then you can turn it into an active process that is experiential and that grows over time. And then I have at growingself.com put together so many more resources for you on this subject and on related subjects. So I have recorded podcasts on emotional safety in relationships, on how to mend trust after an affair. I have a podcast called Why Sorry Isn't Good Enough, and that talks about other ways of really healing trust after a betrayal. I have podcasts on betrayal trauma. I have podcasts on how to trust again if you've really been hurt by fundamentally untrustworthy people in the past, podcasts on how to trust yourself. So there are so many resources here for you. And again, none of these are going to change all of this. Absorbing information isn't the path. The path of real growth and change is experiential. It is a process that occurs over time and with a really trustworthy growth partner. On that note, on my website, the other thing that you'll find are resources that I've put together for you. An article called How to Choose a Therapist that can help you gain knowledge around the different kinds of qualifications and credentials different therapists have, the kinds of questions to ask a prospective therapist in order to determine if they have the competencies to help you grow in a specific area. And similarly, an article on how to choose a marriage counselor that does a deep dive into the differences between mental health professionals and what you need to look for and really be asking about and advocating for so that you have the kind of growth promoting and trustworthy experience that you really deserve. Additionally, I have one more article called Evidence-Based Practice, which takes you into the different modalities of therapy and coaching, talking about which ones are reliable and trustworthy and which ones aren't as much, so that you can make informed decisions about what kind of growth experience you want to sign up for, so that you have, again, the kind of outcomes that you're really hoping for. So this is me being a trustworthy partner for your growth, is to put these resources in front of you so that you can make knowledgeable decisions, because getting involved with great intentions with a therapist that you're trusting to help you create change in certain areas, it's such a huge disappointment and a lost opportunity to connect with the wrong person who has skills and expertise in different areas than the ones that we're talking about today. So I hope that these resources are helpful for you. And of course, at Growing Self, my counseling practice, these are the kinds of things that we specialize in. So if you come to growingself.com and request a free consultation with anybody on our team, you can be confident that they do have the skills and expertise to help you unpack the kinds of things that we've been talking about today, to help you gain self-awareness, to help you understand what your trust language is, that of your partner, and to help each of you grow in this ability to be trustworthy, authentic, honest, emotionally safe, and vulnerable in ways that restore trust in meaningful and lasting ways to heal your bond and create a really strong foundation for your most important relationship. So you can trust us. And I invite you to come to growingself.com if you'd like to explore that further. Okay, so that is enough for today. Thank you again for participating in this conversation with me, and you can trust me to be back in touch with you next week for another episode of the podcast. So until then, take care.